Thank you very much. I just wanted to add, as you mentioned, universities, that one of the things that SIDS itself is looking at is developing what they call a consortium of universities among SIDS countries, that they could sort of develop that think tank among themselves. Anything you wanted to add on what he had to say?
Just to your point about how they've combined resources in Washington, D.C., I think a similar effort is being made in New York among some of the Caribbean countries and the South Pacific countries. They actually share office premises and fax machines and so on and so forth. So some attempt is being made to pull together some of their resources, but not in a substantive way in terms of, okay, let's divide up the work. You cover the first committee, you cover the second committee, you cover the third, please specialize in second, and therefore, that way you cover all the issues more thoroughly, because let's say each mission has only got 2 people, and there are 6 of them. You have 12 people. You can easily cover the 8 committees of the UN, 6 committees of the UN, and spare ones left to cover the Security Council and other activities going on at the UN. But very often it's difficult to put aside your national, your sovereignty issues and say, look, we'll work together. So that, I think, is a challenge. We need to sort of think out of the box. Can we do that? Easier said than done. Who's going to give up your sovereignty to combine resources? Can we trust one another? Issues like that comes up. But I think these are issues that we need to deal with at some point.
Chris, do you want to?
Yes, just 2 quick points in response to the comments made by the last speaker, from the floor. In New York, in addition to any logistical sharing of resources, at the substantive level, within CARICOM, the CARICOM caucus, we do in fact attempt to share and to allocate issues to certain delegations from our respective missions. This is in recognition of the fact that none of the CARICOM missions are very, very large in New York. And so you will in fact find that you may not have a CARICOM mission that is assigned on its own to, let's say, the second committee, to use the example mentioned by Ambassador Menon, but within some of the agenda items of that committee, you will find a delegation. It may be Barbados, as in the case of climate change, or it may be Jamaica, Trinidad, St. Lucia, and some other things. And we actually have a system of caucusing at least over the year, once every fortnight, but during the General Assembly, the main part, every week, and sometimes even more often than that, to exchange notes and to report back what is happening. So there's in fact a sharing of, at the substantive level, of the responsibilities. And this is really what has helped us to really get involved, hopefully reasonably effectively, on some of the development issues on the agenda at the UN. In terms of getting help from outside institutions, I actually think that you're onto something there, and this is actually why towards the end of my own presentation I made some reference, in a very, very serious way, to say that institutions such as organizations such as ACUNS and the various universities that make it up can in fact be helpful, to us. It is the question of establishing the network, making the contacts, but quite often the delegate, he or she, doesn't have all of the time that really should be required to get involved in the, let's say, the depth of the particular issue. And this sort of academic, intellectual input can in fact help us, to perform hopefully even more effectively. So I think that there's a role for that, and it is something that could be looked at.
Thank you very much. Can we have other questions? Mr. Leacock? Well, there's a lady, I'm sorry, there's a lady up before you.
Yeah. Well, the question I am about to ask, part of it has been answered already by the last comment that the panelists made, but I'm going to ask anyway, and maybe you have some additional comments to make. It's about the issue of capacity. That particular issue came out very strongly in your presentations, and as well as other presentations relating to small states functioning in the international arena. And I think this points to an issue that, that recurs all the time, the disconnect between academia and the policy makers. I think that we have no shortage of the Caribbean region and in other regions with small states. So I don't think the issue is really one of capacity, but as you said in your comments, networking and how we do it. And I want to move beyond the issue of letting policymakers have the research that we've conducted to actually having a deliberate policy to link the two. So for example, at the University of the West Indies and other tertiary institutions, I'm thinking rather than inviting or asking or looking to policymakers and the personnel at the ministries, and already we discussed the shortages and the constraints we have, instead of asking them to come in. And so I'm thinking to moving beyond that to having a deliberate policy, having research driven, having the research agenda of institutions in those states being driven by our specific needs. So while there are a lot of exciting things we want to research as international relations students and development and students studying in development and sociology and so on, because of our constraints and because of the challenges we have, that there is a deliberate policy that our research agenda be driven and be informed by our specific needs in those in the various fora and the specific needs we have out there. So as I said, you have addressed some of it, but I don't know if you have any other comments.
Chris?
The only additional point I would want to make in relation to the issue, the way in which you have raised it, is that yes, there does need to be a policy linking the research, the academic institutions, let's say with the governmental, with the foreign policy practitioners. But I think we need to recognize that even that type of linkage, there are constraints. And because you need to keep in mind that governments, even the small governments of the Caribbean, they do implement their foreign policy based on a number of bilateral considerations. And therefore, while you may have a research institution like University of the West Indies, the Institute of International Relations here at St. Augustine, coming up with let's say a policy paper on a particular issue, it is also possible that some elements of that issue over time or in the first 2 years may not be implementable because the government of Barbados or Grenada, as the case may be looking at bilateral relationships with another country which may not coincide with what is coming out in that research. So these are some of the factors you take into account. I mean, to say if I can give a particular example without giving away any state secrets, but basically the whole question of the double taxation agreements is something of increasing importance, for a number of the Caribbean countries. And we therefore need to keep that particular issue in mind as we move forward on some other issues. And therefore, if you find that in seeking to make a move on one point, it may in some way complicate or frustrate the possibility of an agreement, a DTA with a particular country, then you have to look more closely to see how far you do go. So these are some of the practical things that we have to look at and keep in mind. But I fully agree we should find some means of having a closer linkage between the academia and the practitioners.
Okay. Next question, Dan Hicks.
Thank you very much. I do really appreciate the insightful presentations. I was wondering, Ambassador, whether you can give us your comments on what role, if any, the diaspora could play. I mean, there are certain very practical issues that do not involve state secrets. For example, this morning we touched on the issue of deportees. Is there a role for the diaspora in New York, for example, to assist in the mission in helping to have these people reintegrated in the societies when they get back? What extent they can provide training or capacity building, or even cover some meetings that are not very critical in terms of sensitivity. So that is what I'd like to hear you on, as to whether there is a role for the diaspora up there. I appreciate some matters are sensitive, and for example, the ICC, as you know, I've been going to the UN every year for that. But there are many other matters on which the diaspora up there might be able to assist.